As its name suggests, Nintendo Switch 2 isn't looking to tear up the rulebook as Nintendo consoles have so often been known to do, with the focus this time being on providing an iterative evolutions upgrade, rather than a full-on reinvention. Even so, the upcoming next-gen console is changing things up from its predecessor in a number of ways with its hardware upgrades, new user features, pricing policies, and more. Here, we're going to highlight a few of those differences. For the purposes of this specific feature, we're going to be pitting the Switch 2 against only the base Switch model. Screen. Let's get started with the basics. The screen, which brings several upgrades. For starters, the Switch 2 screen is larger than the base Switch models by a noticeable margin, going from 6.2 inches to 7.9 inches. Meanwhile, where the Switch 1 screen outputs at 720p at most, the Switch 2 will be capable of 1080p output. It also touts support for VRR and 120fps gameplay. Magnetic Joy-Cons. We've gotten used to how the Nintendo Switch's Joy-Cons detach and slot back in over the last several years, but Nintendo is changing things up with the Switch 2. Unlike the Switch 1's Joy-Cons, which would slide into and out of rails on either side of the tablet, the Switch 2's Joy-Cons will attach to the tablet magnetically. To detach them, players will have to hold down a new button close to the trigger, with Nintendo providing assurances that the magnetic controllers won't just separate and fall off by themselves. Mouse functionality. Here's another major change you can expect with the Joy-Con 2 controllers, and one that leaks had actually talked about for a while. The new controllers feature sensors on either side, which will allow you to simply turn either Joy-Con sideways and use it like a mouse on a flat surface. The Switch 1 boasted 3 different playstyles in handheld mode, console mode, and tabletop mode, allowing you to seamlessly and instantly swap between them. The Switch 2 is adding mouse mode to that list. C button and game chat. Another major, according to Nintendo at least, new feature being introduced to the Switch 2 is the new C button, which is tied to the new game chat feature. Pressing the button will bring up the game chat menu, which will let you voice chat or video chat if you have the requisite accessory with other players while playing your own game. Sadly, game chat will be available exclusively to NSO subscribers past its open access period, which runs until March of next year. More Joy-Con changes. Nintendo has improved the Switch 2's Joy-Cons in other areas as well. One of the most common criticisms for the original controller continues to be the tiny size of the SL and SR buttons, which Nintendo has directly addressed by expanding their dimensions a tad. The Switch 2's analog sticks are also larger, while the company has also offered assurances that stick drift issues, a major problem with the Switch 1, will be less of a concern with the new console. Pro controller changes. As you'd expect, the Switch 2 will also have its own new Pro controller for players to purchase as an accessory, and it too will come with several changes. The aforementioned C button will of course be featured in addition to an audio jack, something that is glaringly missing in the otherwise excellent Switch Pro controller. Additionally, the Switch 2's Pro controller will also feature new GL and GR buttons on the grip that you'll be able to program and assign to whatever inputs you wish. 4K capable. From a tech and hardware perspective, the Switch 2 is going to be Nintendo's biggest generational leap since the GameCube. The Switch 1 was an outdated piece of kit even back when it launched in 2017, but the Switch 2 is going to be a completely different story. Nintendo has, for instance, confirmed that the console will be capable of outputting games at a 4K resolution, something that is completely impossible on the Switch. Supports ray tracing and DLSS. That the Switch 2 will use Nvidia's DLSS is something that rumors have been claiming for several years, going back far enough that they were initially tied to the fabled and non-existent Switch Pro. This is now officially confirmed, in case you were wondering how the Switch 2 is 4K capable after all, given that its specs would put it below even the Xbox Series S in terms of pure raw numbers. Meanwhile, in addition to DLSS, the Switch 2 will also feature ray tracing support. 3D audio. We've spoken plenty about the many visual enhancements that we can look forward to with the Switch 2, but its upgrades don't end there. On the audio side of things, on top of louder and higher quality speakers, the Switch 2 also touts support for 3D audio in both console and handheld mode. Switch 2 Edition games. The upcoming next-gen console's greater hardware capabilities will obviously mean better-looking new games, but even existing Switch 1 titles are going to benefit. It'll ultimately be up to each publisher's discretion, but for several, you can expect what are being called Nintendo Switch 2 Edition releases, which are basically Switch 2 enhanced versions of Switch 1 titles. The upgrades, pricing, and what have you will obviously vary from game to game and developer to developer. Storage. As you'd expect, the Switch 2's internal storage is also significantly more substantial than the Switch 1. The latter launched in 2017 with 32 GB of internal storage, but its successor will tout as much as 256 GB, though Switch 2 titles are, of course, going to weigh more than Switch 1 games. The console storage will also be expandable, but regular microSD cards will no longer be supported, with new microSD Express cards instead being required. Battery. Given the more powerful hardware of the Switch 2, it comes as no surprise that the console's battery life is taking a hit. Where the Switch 1 can last anywhere between 4 and 10 hours on a full charge, depending on your usage, according to Nintendo, the Switch 2's battery life will range between 2 to 6.5 hours. In terms of charging time, however, Nintendo estimates 3 hours for a full charge, which is about the same as the Switch 1. Dock. Similar to the tablet itself, the Switch 2's dock will also be different from the Switch 1's. At 4.5 inches tall, 7.9 inches wide, and 2 inches thick, it's somewhat larger than the Switch 1's dock, which is 4.1 inches tall, 6.8 inches wide, and 2.12 inches thick. Unlike the original base dock, the new one will also have an Ethernet port for those who wish to directly plug in a LAN cable. GameCube titles on Nintendo Switch Online. Fans have been hoping to see GameCube titles being added to NSO's library for a while now, and that's finally set to start happening June 5th, but only for the Switch 2. Switch 1's Nintendo Switch Online Plus expansion pack subscription includes games for the NES, SNES, N64, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance. On the Switch 2, on top of all that, subscribers will also get GameCube games with The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker, Soul Calibur 2, and F-Zero GX set to be there day one. And more, including Luigi's Mansion, Super Mario Sunshine, Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, and many others arriving later. Pricing changes. This is the big one, and unfortunately not for the right reasons. The original Switch launched in the US at a price of $299. But the Switch 2 is bringing about a steep increase. Nintendo has announced a price of $449 for the console, though with the tariff-shaped clouds looming large, there's a good chance that that price is going to increase before the console has launched, at least in the US. Hey, did you know that we at Gaming Bolt upload new videos every day? Stick around, drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell, and let us know what kind of content you'd like to see in the future with a comment below.